the moment Ned Stark decided not to play the quiet, honorable fool, everything began to change. It was late at night in King's Landing. The candles in his chamber were burning low, and the city outside was loud with wine and secrets. Ned sat alone at the heavy wooden table, the letter still open before him. The truth about Queen Cersei's children was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not King Robert's children. They were born of incest between Cersei and her twin brother, Jaime Lannister. In another life, in another version of events, Ned might have confronted Cersei privately. He might have warned her to flee. He might have tried to protect the children. But tonight, something felt different. He thought of Jon Arryn, poisoned for knowing too much. He thought of the butcher's boy killed without justice. He thought of how the Lannisters smiled while cutting throats behind silk curtains. Honor had not protected anyone in this city, and he realized something painful. Silence would only protect the guilty. So instead of sending for Cersei, he sent for Robert. The king arrived drunk, as always, but curious. He was laughing about some tavern girl when he entered, but the laughter faded when he saw Ned's face. "What is it now?" Robert asked, dropping into a chair. "You look like someone died." "Not yet," Ned replied quietly. The word "yet" made Robert straighten. Ned handed him the book of lineages. He explained everything. The hair, the bloodlines, the truth about the children. He did not rush. He spoke clearly, directly, without fear. At first, Robert laughed. Then he swore. Then he stood up so fast the chair crashed behind him. "You're telling me," Robert growled, his face red with rage, "that those golden-haired little lions are not mine?" "They are not," Ned said, "and many have died to hide this truth." The silence that followed was heavy. Robert's breathing grew rough. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade. This was not just treason. It was humiliation. Robert grabbed his warhammer from the wall. "Call the small council," he said. Now, by dawn, the Red Keep was buzzing with confusion. Lords and guards were summoned without explanation. Cersei was brought into the council chamber, dressed in green silk, her face calm and proud, until she saw Robert's eyes. Ned stood beside the king. He did not look at her. Robert did not waste time. In front of these witnesses, he roared, "I accuse you of treason, of incest, of passing off your brother's spawn as my heirs." The words echoed like thunder. Gasps filled the room. Cersei did not break immediately. She stood tall. "This is madness," she said coolly. "The hand has poisoned your mind." Ned finally met her eyes. "The truth has a way of surfacing," he said. Robert threw the book at her feet. "Look at it." Jaime was not present. That was no accident. He had been sent away on patrol the night before under Ned's quiet orders. Cersei's mask finally cracked, just slightly. Not fear. Anger. "You think you can do this?" she whispered to Ned. "I should have done it sooner," he replied. Robert ordered the king's guard to seize her. Some hesitated. Sir Barristan Selmy stepped forward first, torn but loyal to the crown. Cersei did not scream. She did not beg. She simply glared at Ned as they dragged her away. "You have no idea what you've started," she said softly, and she was right. By midday, the city was in chaos. Word spread like wildfire. The Lannister guards in the city began gathering in groups. The gold cloaks looked uncertain. Some were loyal to coin, not crown. Tywin Lannister would hear of this soon. And Tywin did not forgive humiliation. Robert ordered the arrest of Jaime. Ravens were sent. The gates were sealed. But it was already too late for peace. In the streets, whispers grew louder. The king had been cuckolded, the queen imprisoned, the lion house shamed. Some cheered, many feared. Sansa and Arya were rushed back to their chambers. Ned felt a cold weight in his chest. He had acted for justice, but justice had consequences. Littlefinger watched everything with quiet interest. He said very little during the council meeting, but his eyes were alive. Chaos was a ladder, after all. By evening, the first blood was spilled. A group of Lannister guards tried to break Cersei free during her transfer to the dungeons. Steel clashed in the corridors of the Red Keep. 2 Stark men died. 4 Lannisters fell. Robert did not calm down. He drank harder. He shouted for Tywin's head. He demanded war. Ned stood beside him, realizing something heavy. There would be no peaceful resolution. The Lannisters would not kneel. Tywin would call his banners. The Westerlands would rise. And if war came now, the realm would tear itself apart before winter even arrived. But there was one thing different this time. Robert was alive, and Robert was furious. Ned looked out from the tower that night, watching the torches burn along the city walls. He had chosen truth over mercy. He had chosen action over hesitation. He did not regret it, but he knew the game had changed. Far away in Casterly Rock, a lion would soon roar, and when lions roared, kingdoms burned. If you'd like me to continue, type next and I'll write the next part. Yes, Robert Baratheon did not sleep that night. The wine kept flowing, but it did nothing to calm him. The betrayal burned too deep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Cersei's golden hair and heard Ned's quiet voice telling him the truth. 17 years. 17 years he had called those children his own. 17 years of lies. By morning, the Red Keep felt like a fortress under siege. Jaime Lannister had not been found. The patrol Ned had arranged never returned with him. Instead, word came that Jaime had ridden west before dawn with a small group of loyal men. He had known. Somehow, he had known. Robert smashed a goblet against the wall when he heard. Coward, he roared, running back to his father's skirts. Ned stood still, hands clasped behind his back. He rides for Casterly Rock. Tywin will not ignore this. Robert turned sharply. Good, let him come. I'll crush him like Rhaegar. But this was not Rhaegar Targaryen. This was Tywin Lannister, a man colder, quieter, and far more patient. By noon, ravens were already flying from King's Landing, one to Casterly Rock, demanding Jaime's arrest, one to Riverrun, seeking the Tully banners, one north to Winterfell, warning Robb Stark to prepare men quietly. Ned had learned from the last war. This time, he would not be caught unready. In the dungeons below the Red Keep, Cersei sat in a small stone cell. She was not treated roughly. She was still the queen, even if disgraced. But the silk gowns were gone, the golden crown removed. For the first time in years, she looked smaller. When Ned visited her, she did not rise. You've doomed your daughters, she said softly, not looking at him. They will not be harmed, Ned replied. She finally looked up, eyes sharp as blades. You think my father will allow this humiliation? No, Ned said honestly. Then you are a fool. He stepped closer to the bars. The realm deserves truth. She laughed, a quiet, bitter sound. The realm deserves strength. Truth is just a story men tell when it suits them. Ned did not argue. He simply left her there. Above ground, tension spread like poison. The gold cloaks were divided. Some had long been paid by Lannister coin. Littlefinger quietly shifted their loyalties, promising double pay from the crown. He smiled often, moving like a spider repairing his web. Varys whispered warnings about unrest in the streets. Merchants feared war. Lords with ties to the Westerlands began packing quietly. Then the first true blow came. A raven arrived from the west. Tywin Lannister had called his banners. The Westerlands were marching. Robert read the letter aloud in the council chamber, his voice thick with fury. He demands Cersei's release and calls these accusations treason against House Lannister. Robert crushed the parchment in his fist. Treason? I am the king. Grand Maester Pycelle trembled slightly. He urged caution. Your Grace, Lord Tywin is powerful. Perhaps negotiation. Negotiation? Robert thundered. He beds his daughter with her own brother and I meant to negotiate? Silence followed. Ned stepped forward. We must move quickly. Secure the Riverlands. Call the Stormlands. If Tywin joins with other houses... He won't, Robert interrupted. He'll stand alone. But Ned was not so sure. In the streets, rumors twisted into uglier forms. Some said Joffrey had been arrested. Others claimed the king had gone mad. Panic fed anger. Then something unexpected happened. Stannis Baratheon arrived at Dragonstone's docks with ships. He came not with celebration, but with cold purpose. Stannis had long suspected the truth about Cersei's children. He had fled King's Landing years before for that reason. When he stood before Robert in the throne room, the air felt heavy. "So," Stannis said flatly, "you finally see it." Robert stared at his younger brother. "You knew, I suspected, and you said nothing." Stannis's jaw tightened. "You would not have listened." The truth of that stung. But now Stannis stood firmly beside him. "The throne must have a true heir," Stannis said. "The realm must have a true heir," Stannis said. "The realm must see strength." Robert looked at him for a long moment. For the first time in years, the Baratheon brothers stood united. That alone changed everything. Meanwhile, in the Westerlands, Jaime rode hard beside Lannister banners gathering under crimson lions. His golden armor caught the sun as if mocking the storm forming behind him. He said little to the men around him, but inside fury burned. They had dared to touch his sister. They had dared to shame his house. He would not let it stand. Back in King's Landing, Ned received darker news. The Riverlands had already been raided, not openly, not yet full war. But Lannister men had crossed borders, burning small villages loyal to the Tullys. It was Tywin's way, strike before the enemy fully prepares. Robert slammed his warhammer onto the council table. "Enough! I will not sit and wait." He declared it openly then. House Lannister was in rebellion against the crown. War had begun. Ned felt the weight of it settle over him. This time he was not a prisoner, not a fool trusting mercy. He had chosen action. But war was never clean. As the banners began to gather outside King's Landing, Sansa wept quietly in her chamber for Joffrey, not fully understanding what he truly was. Arya sharpened a small blade she wasn't meant to have, and far away, in Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister stood before a painted map of Westeros, calm as ever. "They've made their move," one of his commanders said. Tywin nodded slowly. "Good. Because now, it was no longer about secrets. It was about survival." And Tywin Lannister did not lose. The drums of war did not wait for winter. Within days, banners began to rise across the realm. The crowned stag of House Baratheon flew over the walls of King's Landing, joined now by the direwolf of Stark. Word spread fast. The king had declared House Lannister traitors. The lion had rebelled against the Iron Throne, and Robert Baratheon was finally awake. He had not felt this alive in years. Armor replaced silk. Steel replaced wine, though not entirely. He walked through the training yard with his warhammer resting on his shoulder, barking orders at commanders like the warrior he once was. The softness of peace was gone. Rage had sharpened him. Ned Stark watched quietly. He had seen Robert like this before, during the rebellion against the Targaryens. Back then, Robert's fury had been righteous, fueled by love and loss. Now it was something darker: humiliation, betrayal, pride wounded before the entire realm, and wounded kings were dangerous. Stannis moved with cold efficiency. He took control of the royal fleet, blockading Blackwater Bay. No ships would leave King's Landing without inspection. If the Lannisters tried to move gold or men by sea, they would find Baratheon steel waiting. Renly, ever charming, began rallying the Stormlands. Unlike in the true history of Westeros, there was no question of succession now. Joffrey was exposed. Stannis stood as heir. Renly smiled and supported his older brother, for now. But the real fire burned in the Riverlands. Tywin Lannister moved fast. His forces swept through small villages loyal to House Tully, burning crops and hanging men who resisted. It wasn't full conquest. It was a message: submit or suffer. Riverrun sent desperate calls for help. Ned received one of the ravens in the early hours of morning. He read it slowly, jaw tightening. "They've crossed in force. Sir Gregor Clegane leads the raids." Robert spat on the stone floor. "Then we ride." And this time, Ned did not argue. The king would not remain behind hunting boars while others fought his war. He would lead. The sight of Robert riding out of King's Landing at the head of 20,000 men shook the realm. Lords who had been hesitant now declared openly for the crown. The king was not hiding behind walls, he was marching. Cersei heard the news from her cell. "They send him to war?" she asked softly when the guard mentioned it. The man nodded. For the first time, real worry touched her face, because if Robert won quickly, there would be no leverage left for her father. Jaime, meanwhile, reached the Lannister host gathering near the Golden Tooth. He rode straight to his father's command tent. Tywin Lannister stood over a war table, calm as stone. Jaime removed his helm. "They've imprisoned her." Tywin did not look up. "I know. They've called us traitors." "Yes." Jaime stepped closer. "Then we march on King's Landing." Tywin finally raised his eyes. "No." The single word surprised Jaime more than anger would have. "We break the Riverlands completely," Tywin continued. "We force the crown to split its forces. Robert is strong in open battle, but he is reckless. We draw him west." Jaime frowned. "And Cersei?" Tywin's voice did not change. Cersei knew the risks of her actions. For a moment, even Jaime felt the coldness of his father's mind. "She is still my daughter, but the survival of our house comes first." The war would not be fought with rage, it would be fought with calculation. The first true battle came sooner than expected. Robert's army met Lannister forces near the Red Fork of the Trident. The fields were still green, farmers having fled days before. Now they would drink blood instead of rain. Ned rode beside Robert as the lines formed. Across the field, crimson banners snapped in the wind. Robert lifted his warhammer high. "For the throne," he roared. And the army answered. The clash was brutal. Steel met steel with a scream. Horses crashed into shields. Arrows darkened the sky. Robert charged like a storm-given flesh, smashing few Lannister knights with terrifying strength. Men who had only heard stories of his rebellion now saw the truth. The king was a monster in battle. Ned fought differently, controlled, measured. His blade cut clean and precise. But war was chaos. At one point, Robert pushed too far ahead, surrounded briefly by Lannister guards. Ned saw it. The king's banner swallowed by red cloaks. For a heartbeat, it felt like everything would collapse. Then Stannis' forces hit the flank hard, disciplined and relentless. The Lannister line buckled. By sunset, the field belonged to the crown. The Lannisters retreated west, leaving hundreds dead behind. Robert stood in the fading light, armor dented, face splattered with blood, not all of it his own. He laughed. A deep, wild laugh. "They bleed," he said. "The lions bleed." But Ned did not laugh, because he had seen something troubling. The Lannisters had not committed their full strength. The retreat had been orderly, planned. Tywin had not tried to win. He had tested them. And that meant something worse was coming. That night, as fires burned across the battlefield, a messenger arrived under white flag. He carried a single demand from Tywin Lannister: release Cersei and recognize Joffrey as rightful heir, or the Westerlands would march not only against the crown, but against the north. Ned read the message twice. Tywin was threatening Winterfell, threatening his children. The war was no longer just about the throne. It was personal. Robert looked ready to tear the parchment in half. But this time Ned spoke first. "We end this quickly," he said quietly. "Before he reaches the neck." Robert's eyes burned with fury. "Then we march west," the king growled. Far away in the cold halls of Winterfell, Robb Stark stood with the letter in his hand, reading his father's warning. War had come, and the wolves would answer. The march west began under a sky the color of old steel. Robert pushed the army hard, refusing long rests. Victory at the Red Fork had filled the men with confidence, but Ned felt something colder beneath it. Tywin Lannister did not retreat without purpose. Every burned village, every abandoned supply wagon, every empty field was part of something larger. They were being pulled. 3 days into the march, the first troubling report came. Scouts returned at dusk, mud-stained and breathless. "Lannister banners seen south," one said. But smaller numbers. "Moving fast." "Running?" Robert asked with a grin. The scout hesitated. "No, your grace." Circling, Ned exchanged a look with Stannis. That was not retreat. That was positioning. That night, as commanders gathered around the war table, word arrived from King's Landing. Littlefinger had uncovered a plot. Several gold cloaks loyal to Lannister coin had attempted to open one of the city gates under cover of darkness. They were stopped. Barely. 2 guards killed. 1 captured. Under questioning, the man confessed Tywin had agents inside King's Landing still. Not just guards, merchants, sellswords, even minor lords. The capital was not secure. Robert's face darkened as the message was read aloud. We should have gutted every last lion in that city. We still can, Stannis said coldly. Ned shook his head. If we start killing indiscriminately, we become what Tywin wants us to be. Soft? Stannis asked. Predictable, Ned answered. But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Tywin was attacking from shadows while they marched openly, and shadows were harder to fight. The next blow came at dawn. Trumpets screamed across the hills as Lannister forces struck from both flanks. It was not a full army, not yet, but enough to cause chaos. Archers rained arrows from wooded ridges. Cavalry smashed into supply lines at the rear. Wagons burned. Horses panicked. Robert roared orders, trying to rally men into formation. Stannis held the center firm, shields locked tight as a wall. Ned rode hard toward the rear, cutting down Lannister riders who tried to scatter their food and provisions. It wasn't meant to win. It was meant to weaken. By midday, the Lannisters vanished again into the hills. The damage was done. Half their supply wagons were gone. Robert slammed his gauntlet against his saddle. Cowards, fight me face to face. But Tywin had no interest in glory. He had interest in exhaustion. That evening, as they regrouped, another raven arrived. This one from the north. Ironborn ships had been spotted near the western coast of the north. Ned's blood ran cold. Balon Greyjoy. The old Kraken was testing the waters again. It wasn't open invasion, not yet. But raids had begun on small fishing villages. Robert cursed loudly. Does the whole realm smell weakness? Stannis' jaw tightened. Greyjoy moves because the West is distracted. Tywin may have promised him something. Ned stared into the fire. Tywin was widening the war, stretching them thin, forcing the North to defend its own shores while the Crown pushed west. It was brilliant and cruel. Meanwhile, in Casterly Rock, Tywin received reports calmly. The king advances despite losses, a commander said. And the Ironborn? Tywin asked, rating as agreed. Tywin nodded once. He had not promised Balon Greyjoy gold or land. He had promised him chaos. If the North pulled men back to defend their shores, Robert's army would shrink. If Robert turned back to secure King's Landing, morale would fall. Either choice weakened the crown. Jaime stood nearby, restless. Let me ride with 1,000 men. I'll strike the king directly. No, Tywin replied evenly. You underestimate him, Jaime insisted. Tywin's eyes sharpened. No, I understand him. Robert Baratheon wants a glorious battle. I will give him something else. And Cersei? Jaime pressed. For the first time, Tywin's expression flickered, not with emotion but calculation. If Robert dies in battle, Tywin said slowly, the realm fractures. Jaime stilled. That was the plan. Not victory. Not rescue. Decapitation. Back in the war camp, Ned walked alone through rows of wounded men. The groans were quiet but constant. He saw boys no older than Robb clutching bandaged arms. He saw fear in their eyes. War had started because he chose truth. He did not regret it, but he felt its weight. Suddenly, a rider burst into camp under Stark banners. Message from Winterfell. Ned hurried forward, taking the parchment with shaking hands. It was from Robb. Father, the Ironborn have attacked Deepwood Motte. We've driven them back, but more ships gather. I request permission to call the full northern banners. Ned closed his eyes briefly. Tywin was forcing him to choose. Protect the realm, or protect his home. Robert approached, reading the look on Ned's face. What is it? The Kraken stirs, Ned said quietly. Robert swore. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Robert surprised him. send word to Robb, the king said. Call the banners. The North defends the North. Ned looked at him. And we finish this fast, Robert added, before Tywin thinks he's clever. But as night fell, another rider approached, alone, cloaked, under no banner. He requested to see Lord Stark privately. Ned met him outside the camp, torchlight flickering across his face. The man removed his hood. It was Tyrion Lannister. You look surprised, Tyrion said dryly. You should be in the Westerlands, Ned replied cautiously. Tyrion smiled faintly. My father plans to sacrifice half the realm to protect his pride. I find myself unconvinced. Ned's hand rested near his sword. Why are you here? Tyrion's eyes gleamed in the firelight. Because if you want to win this war, he said softly, you're fighting the wrong battle. The wind howled across the hills, and suddenly the game became far more complicated. Ned stared at Tyrion for a long moment, saying nothing. The camp behind them buzzed with the low noise of soldiers settling for the night. Fires cracked. Wounded men groaned. Horses shifted restlessly. And here stood a Lannister alone, unarmed, and smiling like he carried a secret worth more than gold. You have courage, Ned finally said. Or desperation, Tyrion replied calmly. It depends on how this conversation ends. Ned gestured for him to walk. They moved away from the campfires toward a small ridge overlooking the dark hills. Speak, Ned said. Tyrion folded his hands behind his back. My father never intended to win through battle, not in the traditional sense. We've already seen that, Ned said. Raids, flanking attacks, supply strikes. Tyrion nodded. Distractions, pressure points. He's not trying to defeat Robert's army outright. Then what is he trying to defeat Robert's army outright? Then what is he trying to do? Tyrion stopped walking and looked directly at him. He's trying to kill the king. The words hung heavy in the cold air. In battle? Ned asked. No, Tyrion said quietly. In chaos. Ned's eyes narrowed. Tyrion continued. My father knows Robert. He knows his temper. He knows Robert will charge ahead when he sees weakness. My father will create an opening, a fake collapse in the line perhaps, and Robert will rush in to finish it. And hidden crossbows will be waiting. Ned's jaw tightened. He's done it before, Tyrion added softly, not to kings, but to enemies who believed in honor and strength. For a moment, all Ned heard was the wind. Why tell me this? He asked. Tyrion gave a small, bitter smile. Because if Robert dies, Stannis takes the throne, and my sister dies the next day, along with her children. That would be justice, Ned said. For you, perhaps, Tyrion replied. For me, it is my family. Ned studied him carefully. You expect me to trust a Lannister? No, Tyrion said honestly. I expect you to be smart. Silence again, if Robert dies, Tyrion continued. The realm fractures. Renly will not kneel easily to Stannis. The Tyrells will choose sides. The Greyjoys will rise fully. The North will bleed defending its shores. My father thrives in chaos. He will present himself as the only stabilizing force left. And Cersei? Ned asked. Tyrion's face hardened slightly. My father may allow her execution if it secures peace. He values legacy more than children. That part Ned believed. So what do you suggest? Ned asked. Tyrion stepped closer. Don't give my father the battle he wants. Robert, meanwhile, sat in his command tent, sharpening his warhammer's edge himself. He looked almost eager. When Ned entered with Tyrion beside him, Robert's expression darkened instantly. What is this? The king growled. A messenger, Ned said carefully. That's a Lannister. That's a dwarf, Tyrion corrected lightly. And currently, your grace, possibly the only Lannister trying to keep you alive. Robert stood slowly. You have 1 minute before I crush your skull. Tyrion didn't flinch. My father plans to lure you into a false break in his lines, Tyrion said plainly. He knows you will charge. He has hidden crossbowmen prepared specifically for that moment. Robert laughed loudly. You think I fear crossbows? I think you bleed like any man, Tyrion replied calmly. The tent went silent. Stannis, who had entered quietly behind them, spoke next. And how would you know this? Because I've seen the preparations, Tyrion answered. My father believes subtlety wins wars. Robert looked to Ned. Ned gave a slow nod. It fits his pattern. Robert paced for a moment, breathing heavily. So what? He snapped. We sit back and let him burn villages? No, Tyrion said. You let him think his plan is working. Robert stopped pacing. Explain, Stannis demanded. Tyrion's eyes sharpened. You allow rumors to spread that your grace grows reckless, that you are furious and impatient. You stage a weakened flank during the next engagement. Robert's lips curled slightly, and when my father springs his trap, Tyrion continued, you are not there. A slow understanding formed in the tent. Instead of Robert charging, another heavily armored rider bearing the king's stag would take the bait. Meanwhile, hidden forces would circle and trap the concealed crossbowmen. Robert would survive. Tywin's secret strike would fail. For the first time since the war began, Robert smiled with something close to respect. You're either brave, he said to Tyrion, or suicidal. Sometimes both, Tyrion replied. Stannis crossed his arms. And why should we not simply arrest you? Because, Tyrion said evenly, if I do not return west, my father will assume I've defected, which means he'll accelerate his plans. You need me free, visible, harmless. Ned could see the risk, but he could also see the opportunity. Robert finally slammed his hand onto the table. We'll do it. The trap was set. For 2 days later, word was spread intentionally that Robert intended to crush Tywin personally at the next clash. Spies would carry that rumor west quickly. When the armies met again near a narrow valley pass, the Lannister lines appeared weaker on the right flank, just enough to tempt a bold charge. Robert rode at the front in full armor, or so it seemed. When the moment came, the Stag banner surged forward into the gap. Hidden Lannister crossbowmen rose from concealed trenches, aiming directly at the charging figure. They fired. Dozens of bolts struck the armored rider. The Stag fell from his horse. For a heartbeat, Lannister soldiers cheered. Then, Stannis' forces slammed into the hidden trenches from both sides. Ned led the countercharge himself. Steel tore through red cloaks. Crossbowmen were cut down before they could reload. The fallen king rose. Not Robert, but a heavily armored knight wearing his colors. Robert himself emerged from the opposite flank with fresh cavalry, crashing into Tywin's stunned center. The field turned instantly. What had been a calculated assassination became a disaster. By sunset, Lannister forces were in full retreat, and for the first time, Tywin Lannister had miscalculated. Back in his command tent miles away, Tywin received the news without visible emotion. The king lives, the messenger finished nervously. Tywin dismissed him quietly. Jaime stepped forward. How? Tywin stared at the war map. They have help, he said slowly, and somewhere in his thoughts, the image of his youngest son began to form. The game was no longer one-sided. And now Tywin would respond not with traps, but with something far more ruthless. If you want to see Tywin's brutal counterstrike and the shocking move he makes next, type next. Yes. Tywin Lannister did not shout when he learned of the failed trap. He did not throw maps or curse the king. He simply stood still for a long time, hands resting on the war table, eyes fixed on the painted shape of Westeros. The king lives, Jaime repeated, still struggling to understand how their perfect strike had collapsed. Yes, Tywin said quietly. And someone warned him. Jaime's jaw tightened. Tyrion. Tywin did not answer immediately. But the silence confirmed it. For a moment, something cold passed through Jaime's expression. Not surprise, not even anger. Disappointment. What will you do? Jaime asked. Tywin finally looked up. His face was calm as stone. If the king cannot be killed in battle, he said, then we remove what he values most. Jaime understood instantly. The North. Tywin nodded once. Not an invasion, he continued. Not yet, something sharper. 3 days later, ravens flew across the realm with horrifying news. Winterfell had fallen, not by siege, not by Lannister banners, but by betrayal. The Ironborn had returned in force under Theon Greyjoy, who had once been raised alongside Robb Stark, like a brother. With most of the northern strength preparing for southern war, the castle's defenses were thinner than usual. The attack had been swift and cruel. Gates opened from within, northern men slaughtered in their own courtyard, the Stark banner torn down. When the message reached Ned Stark's hands, he did not breathe for several seconds. Winterfell taken, Bran and Rickon missing. Theon Greyjoy declared Prince of Winterfell. The parchment trembled slightly in his grip. Robert was the first to break the silence in the command tent. "I'll march north myself," he growled. "You can't," Stannis said sharply. "If we turn now, Tywin regains momentum." Ned said nothing. He felt like the ground beneath him had vanished. Winterfell was not just stone and wood, it was his home, his blood, his children, and now it was in enemy hands. Another line in the message cut deeper than the rest. The Ironborn claim alliance with the Westerlands. Tywin had not sent lions, he had sent chaos. Robert stepped closer to Ned. "We end this now," the king said firmly. "We crush Tywin and then we deal with the Kraken." But Ned's voice, when it came, was quieter than any of them had heard before. "My sons are in that castle." The tent fell silent. Even Stannis looked away. Robert clenched his jaw. "Robb will handle it." Ned met his eyes. "He is still a boy." "And you are the hand of the king," Robert shot back. "If you abandon this army, the realm falls apart." The words were harsh, but they were true. Tywin had forced the impossible choice, father or realm. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Winterfell's great hall, Theon Greyjoy stood before the hearth where Ned Stark once sat. He wore furs now, trying to look every bit the conqueror. But his hands were shaking. He had not expected it to be this easy. He had not expected the screams. Men he once trained beside now lay dead in the courtyard. And Bran had escaped. Theon's jaw tightened. If he did not secure his claim quickly, his own men would question him. So he made a decision, one that would echo across the war. 2 small burned bodies were displayed before the gates of Winterfell, claimed to be the Stark boys. When that news reached the southern war camp, something inside Ned Stark broke. He did not shout, he did not weep. He simply sat down slowly in his chair and stared at the fire. Robert read the message twice, then crushed it in his fist. "I will kill every Greyjoy alive," he swore. But Ned remained silent. Tywin's move had worked perfectly. The North would erupt in fury. Robb Stark would abandon southern support and march home. The alliance between Crown and Wolf would weaken, and Robert would be left fighting largely alone. Stannis spoke carefully. "If Robb pulls back with northern forces, our numbers shrink significantly." Robert slammed his fist onto the table. "Then we end Tywin before that happens." But even as he said it, they all understood something had shifted. The war was no longer clean lines and banners. It was personal. Tywin had attacked Ned's heart, and now Ned faced the hardest choice of his life. That night, Tyrion approached Ned quietly outside the camp. "I heard," Tyrion said softly. Ned did not look at him. "Was this your father?" Ned asked after a long pause. "Yes," Tyrion answered honestly, "but not directly. That's what makes him dangerous." Ned's voice was steady, but hollow. "He thinks pain will make me reckless, and will it?" Tyrion asked carefully. For the first time, Ned looked at him. "No," he said. But inside, the storm was growing. At dawn, a decision would be made. Would Ned march north to reclaim his home, or stay beside Robert and finish what he started? Either choice would change the fate of the 7 kingdoms forever. Dawn came gray and heavy. Ned Stark had not slept. He sat alone outside his tent, watching the sky slowly lighten over the hills. Around him, soldiers were beginning to stir. Armor clinked. Fires were fed. Horses were watered. War did not pause for grief. But inside Ned, something had changed. He had always believed duty and honor walked the same road. Now they were pulling him in opposite directions. Footsteps approached. Robert stood beside him, silent for a moment. "I know that look," the king said finally. "You're thinking of riding north." Ned did not deny it. "My sons," he said quietly. Robert exhaled heavily. "If the boys are alive, Robb will find them. If they're dead," he stopped. Ned's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Winterfell has stood for thousands of years. It cannot fall to Ironborn pirates. And the throne cannot fall to Lannisters," Robert shot back. "That's what this war is." Ned looked at his old friend. "No," he said. "This war began because of truth. But now it is pride, revenge, power." Robert's eyes hardened. "You think I fight for pride?" Robert's eyes hardened. "You think I fight for pride?" "I think Tywin wants you to." The words hung in the cold air. For a long time neither man spoke. Finally Ned stood. "I will not abandon you," he said firmly. "If I leave now, the realm fractures. That is what Tywin wants." Robert searched his face. "And Winterfell?" Ned swallowed. "Robb is Lord Stark in my absence," he said. "It is time he proves it." It was the hardest decision of his life, but it was made. By midday, ravens flew north with new orders. Robb Stark was commanded to retake Winterfell at any cost. The northern banners were fully culled. The Ironborn were to be hunted without mercy, and Ned would stay south. When Tyrion heard the news, he nodded slightly. "You chose the realm," he said. "I chose duty," Ned replied. "Sometimes they're not the same thing," Tyrion murmured. The next battle came faster than expected. Tywin had learned of Robert's survival and adjusted. Instead of hidden crossbows, he gathered his full strength near the foothills west of the Trident. No tricks, no feints, a direct confrontation. Perhaps he believed Ned would retreat north. Perhaps he thought grief would cloud judgment. Instead, he found Robert Baratheon marching straight toward him. The battlefield stretched wide and open beneath a pale sky. Two great hosts faced each other, crimson lions against crowned stags and direwolves. This time Tywin himself rode at the front. Golden armor gleamed in the sunlight. Across the field, Robert lifted his warhammer. "No traps today," he muttered. Ned rode beside him. No mercy either. The horns sounded, and the world exploded into violence. The clash was thunderous. Shields splintered. Horses screamed. Men fell beneath waves of steel. Tywin fought like a commander, not a berserker. He stayed guarded, issuing precise orders, adjusting formations smoothly even as chaos raged. Robert was the storm. He smashed through Lannister knights, roaring like a man reborn. Every swing of his hammer shattered armor and bone alike. But Tywin's center held. This was not a reckless Lannister charge. This was disciplined, layered defense. Stannis' forces pressed the left flank, pushing hard. Ned's northern men carved through the right. For hours, neither side gave ground. Then something shifted. A Lannister reserve force emerged from behind a ridge, fresh troops, hidden until now. They slammed into Stannis' flank with brutal force. The line wavered. Robert saw it and began to turn, ready to charge again. But this time, Ned grabbed his reins. "Hold!" Ned shouted. "That's what he wants." Robert hesitated, just for a second. And that second saved him. Instead of charging blindly, Stannis pulled his men into a tight defensive wall. Arrows rained down from northern archers positioned earlier, on a small rise, a move Ned had ordered at dawn, anticipating a hidden reserve. The Lannister reinforcements found themselves exposed. Robert finally charged, not into a trap, but into weakness. The hammer fell like judgment. By sunset, the field belonged to the crown once more. Lannister banners retreated in scattered groups. And for the first time since the war began, Tywin Lannister withdrew personally from the battlefield, not in panic, but in recognition. He could not break Robert through strategy alone. As night fell, Ned stood among the wounded again. They had won, but victory felt hollow. Too many dead, too much blood spilled. Robert approached, breathing heavily but grinning. We've broken him, the king said. Not yet, Ned replied, and as if summoned by those words, a rider arrived under white flag. A Lannister envoy. He carried a sealed letter bearing Tywin's sigil. Ned broke it open and read silently. Then he read it again. "What does it say?" Robert demanded. Ned looked up slowly. "Tywin offers terms." Silence fell around them. "What terms?" Stannis asked. Ned's voice was steady. "He will withdraw all forces and recognize your rule if Cersei and her children are returned to him alive and unharmed." Robert's expression darkened instantly. "He wants them back." "Yes." "And if we refuse?" Ned looked back at the letter. "He says the war will not end, not until one house is erased." The wind moved softly across the blood-stained field. The realm stood at a crossroads. Justice, revenge, peace. One choice would end the war quickly. The other would burn Westeros to its foundations. Robert's grip tightened on his hammer. "Well, Ned," he said quietly, "what would you do?" The battlefield was quiet now, too quiet. Smoke still rose from scattered fires. The wounded groaned in the distance. Ravens circled overhead, waiting for the sun to fall completely. In the center of it all, Robert Baratheon stood with Tywin's letter crushed in his fist. "Well, Ned?" he asked again. Ned looked at the ground for a long moment before answering. "Tywin is losing," he said carefully. "He would not offer terms otherwise." Robert snorted. "He wants his precious daughter back." "Yes," Ned replied, "and his grandchildren." Robert's jaw tightened at the word. "They are not my blood." "No," Ned said, "but they are children." Silence. Stannis stood nearby, watching both men. "If we release them," he said coldly, "we legitimize their survival. That leaves claims and future wars." "And if we execute them?" Ned asked. Stannis did not hesitate. "We end the Lannister line of succession." Robert's breathing grew heavier. "Tywin says, if we refuse," Robert muttered. "The war does not end." Ned nodded. "And he means it. He will burn the Riverlands to ash. He will fund rebellions to ash. He will fund rebellions. He will make the realm bleed for years." Robert stared into the darkening horizon. "I want her head," he said quietly. "After what she did. After the lies." "I know," Ned answered. "And the boy," Robert continued bitterly, "Joffrey. I see now what he is. Cruel. Rotten." Ned's voice stayed calm. "Then do not be like him." Robert turned sharply. "You ask me for mercy? I ask you for strength," Ned said. The words hit harder than any hammer. Robert looked at his old friend, really looked at him. The man who had ridden beside him in rebellion, who had nearly died for him, who had chosen the realm over his own sons just days ago. "You would let them live?" Robert asked. "I would exile them," Ned said firmly. "Strip their titles, send Cersei and her children across the narrow sea. Let Tywin keep his pride but not his power." Stannis frowned. "That leaves a threat alive." "Only if we make them martyrs," Ned replied. The wind moved through the camp. Robert's anger was still there, burning hot, but something else was rising too. Tiredness. Years of it. "I started a war over a woman once," Robert said quietly. "Lost myself in it." He looked down at the letter. "I won't do it again." Stannis's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. Robert finally made his choice. "Send word," he said. "Cersei Lannister and her children will be exiled. They are stripped of all titles and claims. Jaime Lannister is declared traitor if he returns to Westeros." Ned exhaled slowly. "And Tywin?" Stannis asked. Robert's expression hardened again. "He bends the knee publicly," Robert said. "Pays reparations to the Riverlands in the north. Disbands his armies if he refuses." His eyes darkened. "Then we finish it." The envoy was sent back before midnight. Tywin Lannister read the terms in silence. Jaime stood nearby, tense. "He spares her?" Jaime asked. "Yes," Tywin replied evenly. "And the children?" "Exiled." Jaime let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For a long time, Tywin said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. He chooses stability over vengeance, Tywin murmured. Good. You accept? Jaime asked. Tywin looked toward the west. For now, because Tywin Lannister understood something important. A dead lion is forgotten. An exiled one waits. Weeks later, the war ended not with another battle, but with a public kneeling. Before gathered banners and watching lords, Tywin Lannister bent the knee to Robert Baratheon. It was brief, it was controlled, but it was real. The realm exhaled. Cersei and her children were escorted to a ship under heavy guard. She did not cry. She did not beg. As she boarded, she turned once to look at King's Landing. Her eyes found Ned briefly in the crowd. You think this is victory, she said softly. It is peace, Ned replied. For now, she answered. The ship sailed east. Jaime did not go with her. He remained in the Westerlands, silent and colder than ever. Winterfell was retaken by Robb Stark after brutal fighting. Theon Greyjoy was captured alive and brought in chains before the Northern Lords. The burned bodies had not been Bran and Rickon. The boys were found alive, hidden by loyal men. When that news reached Ned, he closed his eyes and finally allowed himself to breathe. Months later, the realm began to heal. The Riverlands rebuilt slowly with Lannister gold. The Ironborn retreated after suffering heavy losses. The North stood stronger under Robb's leadership. And Robert changed. Not completely. He still drank. He still laughed loudly. But he attended council meetings now. He listened more. He leaned on Stannis for law, on Ned for honor. The Iron Throne no longer felt like a seat he barely tolerated. It felt earned again. One evening, as the sun set over King's Landing, Robert stood beside Ned on the castle walls. You were right, Robert said quietly. About what? Ned asked. Mercy. Ned looked out over the city. Mercy is not weakness, he said. It is control. Robert nodded slowly. Below them, the city lived on, unaware how close it had come to burning. Far across the narrow sea, a lioness watched the sunset from a foreign shore, her children beside her. In the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister rebuilt carefully, patiently. The game was not over. It never truly was, but for now, the realm stood united. Because this time when Ned Stark exposed the Lannisters, he did not lose his head, and the Seven Kingdoms did not drown in endless war.